Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
Welcome back to MacBreak Studio. And we have in studio Alexis Van Hurkman, colorist, author, filmmaker, and he's going to pick up where he left off and show us more DaVinci Resolve and how do we get our projects from Final Cut Pro 10 into DaVinci Resolve.
Yes, yes. Well, the nice thing is it's really easy because DaVinci was one of the first companies to jump on the Final Cut 10 XML bandwagon. As soon as the spec was published, I was amazed how quickly they enabled you to move your projects via XML in from 10 and back again.
Fantastic.
So what we're going to look at is what is supported in that round trip and how you go about it. So as new versions of XML come out from Apple, DaVinci has been doing a good job of supporting a lot of the effects that come along with it. So right here in this first clip, if I go over to transform and do a reset, we can see that there's actually a scale and reposition happening. I'm going to undo that. So then over here I have these stacked clips, and you can see if I scroll down, I actually have a blend mode going on. If I select this one, I've got a blend mode going on, multiply, and some opacity happening. So I've got that, that's supported. And then if I continue going on here, I've got a color correction happening. If I reset, you can see. Now, if you're going to do color correction inside of Final Cut 10,
on the color board.
On the color board, right. If I go ahead
Command 6.
And
there you go.
Click that button. If you're going to use the color board, there are a few rules for what controls you can use. Are
these rules published somewhere, or you just had to?
They will be published as soon as somebody rewrites the manual at some point.
At some point.
I wonder who that will be.
I don't know.
So anyway, but the rules as they stand are you can only use the global color control and the global exposure control if you want your color corrections, your adjustments to move across to DaVinci Resolve with any fidelity.
Okay, excellent.
So that's, you know, it seems like a limitation. It's partially based on the desire of, I imagine, both of the engineering teams to adhere as closely to the CDL standard, the color decision list standard as possible.
Got it.
It's limiting, but it also is fairly universal, which is important for that sort of a standard. So anyway, I've got these different effects set up. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select that project and export XML. I'll go ahead and save it, replace the previous one I had, and now I'm going to quit.
Would you recommend quitting? I mean, do you need to quit?
You know, I don't know if you need to quit, but both Final Cut Pro 10 and DaVinci Resolve use GPUs heavily for processing, and I just don't want there to be any kind of a conflict.
Okay, it seems reasonable.
DaVinci Resolve is an extremely high-performance tool, and it relies heavily on the GPU. So anything else that's going to be using the GPU at the same time.
And we're running this off of a MacBook Pro right now. And
we're running it off a MacBook Pro with one GPU, which will work, but it's definitely not optimal. We're not going to see the highest performance Resolve is capable of.
Okay,
good to know. Good to know. I'm going to log in as admin. And I am going to go ahead, and I've already created an empty project, so I'm just going to load that. Actually, you know what? It'd be a better demo if I just created a new one. I'm being warned about GPU memory. Add a new project, call it demo. This one's blank. Now I'm going to jump over to the conform page, which as we saw previously is where you bring your projects in.
You're right.
Click the load button in timeline management. I'm going to jump to the desktop, and I am going to choose that civil reenactment FCP XML file.
That you exported moments ago.
Open it up, and now I've got the load XML window. Now, a lot of what's in this window is fairly self-explanatory. I just want to jump through these checkboxes really quickly. The top checkbox, automatically set project settings, that just makes sure that your new DaVinci Resolve project is going to be set up identically to your Final Cut project. So
frame rate, frame size, everything matches.
All that stuff.
So you don't have to worry about it with that checkbox.
Exactly.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Similarly, this automatically imports source clips into the media pool. That takes care of if there is a path, a file path for each piece of media in the XML file that works. In other words, the media can be found. It'll just go ahead and bring it in automatically and populate the media pool, and you don't have to worry.
And because DaVinci is basically a big database, it's just keeping track of where it all is.
DaVinci is database driven.
Got it.
So that's an important thing. Now,
you've just added it to the database.
Yeah, but you need to make sure that the volume is accessible to Resolve, and as we saw before, you need to set that up in the preferences.
Right. In the previous episode, you need to watch if you're not familiar with Resolve. Exactly.
In fact, I can show that here as well, but anyway, moving on. Use sizing information. It's optional whether or not you use the pan and scan style motion settings, those transforms from Final Cut 10. So if I know those transforms are doing the right thing, I can use them, and then I don't have to reinvent the wheel.
The editor knows what he's doing, and per network specs, it's exactly cropped the way they want it.
Exactly.
You don't want to mess with it.
Or if I'm doing some more exotic workflow and I know that sizing information isn't going to be appropriate, I can leave this turned off. It doesn't come in, and then I use Resolve's built-in transform tools to take care of all that stuff.
Yes. What we call geometry.
Geometry, right.
I watched your tutorial.
In Resolve, it's called PTZR, pan, tilt, zoom, rotate.
That's right.
So turn that on, because I do want the information. And down here, last checkbox, use color information.
The color board.
The color board, exactly. Okay. If I trust the editor's decisions, I know that they're good colorists and they're making sensible decisions.
Up, down.
I can bring that in.
That's funny.
Or if I decide, you know what, I have, say, an offline reference movie that they've made for me that I can use.
Right.
And I'm just going to discard that information and start from scratch because I think I can do a better job as a colorist, then I can leave that off.
Okay, excellent.
For now, I'm going to turn that on, click OK, and here we go. It looks a little funky because we're competing for resources with the GPU, but it should start
those are all your clips
in the those are all of my clips. So if I jump over to the color page,
yeah, the GPU is having a hard time drawing.
The GPU is just dying right now. But
actually, that's a cool effect. That's
yes, built-in solarization. This is an older MacBook, unfortunately.
Your results may vary. No.
Your results will definitely vary if you're using a supported configuration. But as you can see,
the thumbnails are drawn properly.
The thumbnails are drawn properly. The project has been brought in. It's working the way it should. So what I can do is I can show some of the information as it's been brought in. So for example, I'm on this last clip, and I can see that if I go into my primary page, I've got my offset controls set. There's color information being preserved there that we can't see. Wow. This is the greatest demo in the history of demos. One thing I want to point out is if I right-click on the first clip that had the sizing information, down here, use sizing information from XML, there's a checkbox.
It's being used by default.
So it's being used by default. I can turn that off whenever I want, or I can turn it back on. So it's saved somewhere other than the format page where I do all of that kind of resizing.
Yeah.
And
the graphics card is just having a hard
camper.
And there's only, what, 5 clips there? So does this necessitate or at least point out the need for having a really good graphics card on your system?
I mean, typically at this point they're supporting the newer Mac Pros. It's OpenCL compliant for what I would refer to as a demo quality experience. So you're not getting the highest performance, but it'll work and you can do everything you need to do. If you really want to cook with Resolve, you really need to have an NVIDIA card-driven situation using a Mac Pro or a Windows machine.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things, I mean, you know, so this is the downside of Resolve, is it does require a certain minimum performance.
Absolutely.
The upside of Resolve is if you feed it multiple GPUs, let's say you have a Cubix expander box feeding your Mac Pro or feeding your Windows machine, you can build a multi-GPU processing experience that is going to cook the best performance you've ever seen on the desktop. So anyway, the point being, with these transforms, it doesn't affect the input transform parameters, the pan, tilt, zoom, rotate parameters. They're stored elsewhere. You can turn them on and off as well. So you never lose them if you temporarily decide to clear them.
Right.
With regards to, yep, not happy. With regards to the composite, which you can see stacked here.
Oh, look, we're getting our image back.
Oh, hey, look at that. We've gotten our image back. So with regards...
Look at it. You can see the composite right there.
Right.
There it is. I brought in the composite.
Exactly. So composite modes are, in fact, supported by Resolve, which means that you can grade in context, which is a fantastic thing. It's something that you couldn't do in an application like Color, for example, because while you could import multiple layers, you couldn't actually see the composite. Here, I can see the composite, I can do a grade, and I can see how it's going to affect the actual composite, which is a fantastic level of control. While this is working out so well, I'm also going to point out there's this Unmix tab. If I click the Unmix tab, now I'm looking at
the raw media.
Raw media.
That's fantastic.
Uncomposited. So you have your choice. If I need to see the raw media, I can work in Unmix mode. If I need to see the composite, I can move back to clip mode.
Fantastic.
While I'm at it, here I can see I've got the color correction going on there, so I can go ahead and use that if I want. Here I've got that zoom in. It works the way I want it to. If I turn off use sizing information from XML, you can see I can go back to the original state of the image. Maybe I want to do this to grade relative to the whole shot.
Sure.
But then I want to go back to my resize. So I have my options for how I do that. If I want to do anything with this composite mode, I have to go back to the conform page.
And you can see it stacked on a V2 track.
You can see it stacked on a V2 track. I can also right-click it and see my composite mode submenu. Not all of Final Cut 10's composite modes are supported. This is the subset of ones that are. So, you know, as with the color corrections coming over, you have to kind of be careful how you use what you use, because there's not 100% compatibility. But all the ones you would probably want to use are in the list.
That makes sense.
So that's a big deal. So say we grade all of this, we set it up to be the way we want it to be. To complete the round trip, all you need to do is from the color page, go up to Session Render, open up the render window, and up here there's this Easy Setup pop-up, and it's defaulting right now to FCP XML round trip.
Nice.
That's it. Click that, go down to Destination Path, click Browse, choose where you want to do the render, and once that's populated, all you have to do is click the render button once it pops up. I'm not going to waste our time watching a render bar here. Right. But render that out, and what you end up with is a separate alternate graded set of media. And this is what you're going to send back to Final Cut Pro. Just like lots of other round trip experiences and lots of other applications, you render an alternate set of media, and then what you do is we get out of the render window, go back to the conform page, and click Export.
So it's a two-step process.
It's a two-step process.
So you render the media, and now it's going to make a Final Cut XML file that you can then re-import in Final Cut, and it reconnects to that rendered media.
Exactly. Exactly.
Got it.
Now, if I open up the format window, you can see that I can actually export a lot of different formats. I can export AAF if I'm a media, an avid user. I can export Final Cut Pro 10 XML. I can export regular, quote-unquote, Final Cut Classic XML.
Wow. So what I hear you saying is
I have my option.
I could actually use DaVinci, this free light, as a launderer.
Well, you can sort of use it as a launderer, and it's worth talking about the limitations.
Okay. We'll talk about that some other time.
Well, it's worth talking about. So I can bring in Final Cut 7 and export Final Cut 10. I can bring in Final Cut 10 and export Final Cut 7. So I can go both those ways, but DaVinci Resolve doesn't do anything with audio. So if your project has audio in it, it's going to be stripped out. Now for finishing workflows, that's not a big deal because typically the audio mix is happening at the same time that I'm doing my grade.
That makes sense.
So it's not a big deal. But if you're a one-man band and you're doing your audio finishing, you're going to have to repoach that audio from another sequence once you're back in Final Cut.
All right. Excellent.
And then the last thing I should point out is you can't cross-convert from AAF to FCP XML. That's a limitation of the system right now.
All right. So there you have it, a round-trip workflow from Final Cut Pro 10, DaVinci Resolve, and back. And I just want to point out, Alexis has an excellent training called DaVinci Resolve Core Training at rippletraining.com. You want to check it out. And Alexis, thanks for joining us here on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.